Berlin, 1943. The air inside the grand ballroom was heavy with smoke, perfume, and secrets. Officers in black uniforms laughed under the golden chandeliers, while a pianist played a tune that drowned the echoes of war outside. And then she appeared. Woman in crimson silk, her steps soft, but her presence louder than the music. Every eye turned toward her, every heartbeat paused for a second. She smiled, but her smile was not made for love. It was made for war. No one in that room knew that inside. Her clutch bag was not lipstick or powder, but a transmitter and a vial of cyanide. She had crossed borders with false names and fake papers, carrying messages that could destroy cities. Her perfume carried danger. Her beauty carried death. She moved through the room like a ghost, touching shoulders, shaking hands, whispering names. She was not here to kill anyone with bullets. She was here to kill with trust. The general who would meet her tonight had no idea that she already knew his secrets. His roads, his codes, his orders. He thought he was meeting a lover. He was meeting his end outside. Snow began to fall, covering Berlin like a silent shroud. Inside her eyes reflected fire. She would leave the party before midnight and vanish into the cold. By morning, an entire convoy of German armor would be destroyed in an ambush that she set up with a single message. No medals would be given to her. No one would ever speak her name, but history would remember the silence that followed her footsteps. They called her the woman with the perfume of death. A whisper in the dark, a shadow in the light. The first in a line of women who would use beauty as a weapon and deception as their uniform. This was not the war of men. This was the War of Whispers, London, 1941. The city still smelled of smoke and ration bread, but beneath the sound of air raid sirens and the clatter of boots, another war was being planned in quiet rooms, a plain desk, a lamp, and a file stamped top secret. She walked into that room with a single suitcase and eyes that had seen too much for her years. He slid the file across the desk and watched her hands as she opened it. Profiles, codes, contact, names, languages, and a single line that would define her life. Are you willing to die? For a secret, her name was Noor Inayat Khan, a soft-spoken woman born to an Indian Sufi family who grew up with hymns and music, and yet who chose to step into the darkness and transmit hope. She trained with the Special Operations Executive, learning how to vanish, how to speak in lies, how to become another person for a cause. She barely explained to those who loved her. Her instructors warned her that radios were the most dangerous weapon in occupied Europe because the Gestapo hunted every signal with blood and method. She learned to breathe like a metronome, to make a transmitter sing like a neighbor, and to hide her terror behind a laugh. When she parachuted into France, the moon was a silver coin and the fields were frozen. She moved through villages with a letter pressed to her chest and a code name on her tongue. Her presence was small, but it was a spark that ignited networks that fed the resistance with ammunition, food, and the only thing that could tip a battle: timely intelligence. Every transmission she sent could not only change a skirmish, but could also mark the exact place where German patrols would strike. And so every night she balanced courage with fear, and every morning she counted the cost of the orders she had sent. The Gestapo could be anywhere, and betrayal could wear the face of a friend. Her last transmissions were calm and full of code words that would save men and cost her life. When the nets closed, she walked into a trap, not because she was careless, but because she would not let those she loved die for her silence. Even in a cell under the glare of a lamp, she kept her voice steady and refused to betray a single name. One night, a guard asked her why she risked everything for a foreign land, and she answered simply, freedom. The world would later call her brave and write her name on medals. But in that cell, the real story began to twist into legend as she prepared for a choice that would end with music and gunfire. Paris, 1942. In salons and supper clubs, the noble women wore pearls and secrets, and the city moved between light and shadow. She was a countess by birth, and by the way she walked, she commanded rooms without raising her voice. Her salons were a map of occupation where generals and diplomats celebrated victories and drank to futures they imagined would never come. But the Countess had another room in her house where she kept maps and lists and photographs with pins through the faces of men who thought themselves untouchable. Christina Skarbek, known as Christine Granville, was a woman born into chaos who learned to wield charm like a sword and brute cunning like a shield. Her first missions were survival missions, built from forged papers and a laugh that disarmed suspicion. She seduced confidences out of men who believed themselves superior, and she translated those confidences into rescues. She smuggled pilots from safe houses to clandestine airfields, and she walked past checkpoints with a smile, while resistance couriers hid in the folds of her coat. One night she posed as a lover to a colonel who believed himself safe inside the arms of a beautiful collaborator. She played the role so well that he whispered secrets that would change entire campaigns. In Warsaw she bribed, she lied, and she shot when necessary, and each success tightened the noose around the occupiers. She once jumped a fence and ran through a field under tracer bullets to rescue a captured agent who later led a critical sabotage action. Her style was improvisation, and her creed was necessity, and because of her improvisation, whole units moved to safety, and whole plans survived where they would have failed. Enemies called her seductive names, and friends called her miracle worker, and she did not mind which name she earned as long as the job got done. But every miracle carried a price, and in a winter with snow like spilled milk, a mission went wrong, and a friend betrayed a meeting, and suddenly the Countess found herself cornered by men who had no patience for beauty, only for confession. She had a pistol and wit, and a refusal to be taken alive. And in the courtyard, that night she gave a performance that would become legend, but would also mark the beginning of a darker
Occupied
game
France, 1943. A humble attic with a wooden table and a crack in the roof became the most dangerous theater in Europe. On that table sat a radio small enough to hold like a secret, yet powerful enough to shape battles. Its dial turned, and with each tick, a voice could reach across fields, forests, and rivers, and instruct men to move to places where the enemy would not be waiting. The men who built those radios were engineers with steady hands and a hatred of tyranny. The women who operated them were even braver, because they did not simply hide. They spoke, and every word was a possible rope to hang them with. They learned to mimic farmers, to sound like children, to be indistinct in the crowded frequency of the airwaves. They would take a breath and begin a code that sounded like weather, but meant strike now, or retreat at dawn, or burn the bridge at midnight. From small towns came transmissions that redirected convoys and saved entire regiments from ambush. The radio operators moved like ghosts between farms and attics and barns, carrying batteries and cloaked in the smell of bread and sweat. When the enemy set up direction, the operators learned to keep transmissions short and to change sights like a man changing coats. One operator, known as Madeleine, sent a message that would reroute German reinforcements and cause a small division to be trapped in a valley with no escape. Her voice remained calm and her hands did not tremble as she spoke. Code that saved lives, but the cost was always the same, because the sound of her voice could be traced and tracers could be sent, and when they came with boots and with the searchlights of the Gestapo. Each night the operators slept without comfort and listened for the whisper of Allied replies, and when the replies did not come, they knew courage had a limit. One winter night, after many transmissions, the roof above the attic creaked, and then men came sliding through the snow with rifles ready, and a silence fell that was heavier than any bomb. Her last message was a simple string of code that made the difference between slaughter and escape. And then the radio fell quiet, and the chimney smoked, and the story moved on. Berlin, 1943. Under the chandeliers and the echo of violins, she was just another singer with red lips and a voice that could stop a room. But behind every note lay a code, behind every performance, a message carried across occupied Europe. Josephine Baker was a name known in every club in Paris before the war, and a name whispered through corridors of fear during it. When the world closed its borders to truth, she opened her heart to the French resistance. Her songs became her shield, her stage became her camouflage. While generals applauded and officers toasted her, she hid secret messages in her sheet music, written in invisible ink,
and carried them across borders tucked among her costumes. She sang for the enemy and smiled while memorizing. Troop movements whispered drunkenly into her ear, each smile a trap, each encore a signal. Her fame gave her freedom of movement. Her courage gave that freedom meaning. She performed at embassies and ballrooms, but her real concerts were in code. When she returned to her chateau outside Paris, she trained carrier pigeons and housed refugees and agents under the guise of servants and dancers. The Gestapo suspected her but could never prove anything because beauty and celebrity were a shield as strong as any weapon. Her life was a play written in danger and applause. She risked her fame, her fortune, and her life to deliver intelligence that would later aid in the liberation of France. In one mission, she nearly died of infection while smuggling documents in her underwear across the border. When war finally ended and the flags changed, she stood not on a stage, but on a battlefield of memories. She had turned her fame into a weapon and her art into resistance, and history would later remember her not only as a performer, but as a warrior who sang to shadows and turned music into freedom. Amsterdam, 1944. The canals reflected the flames of war, and in that reflection, a figure moved quietly, like smoke. Her name was Hannie Schaft, the girl with red hair who dyed it blonde and walked the streets like any other clerk. She carried books by day and guns by night. Her face appeared ordinary, but her courage extraordinary. She joined the Dutch resistance while still a student, angry that her Jewish friends were disappearing and her professors stayed silent. She learned to deliver weapons and papers, and later to aim and fire with precision that stunned her trainers. She became an assassin, a whisper on German patrol lips, a shadow they feared. She lured officers into alleys and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Every shot was a message and every escape a miracle. She once walked straight through a checkpoint, carrying a briefcase full of explosives, smiling so naturally that no one thought to question her. Her name became legend and bounty posters covered walls, but she walked beneath them with her head high. When capture finally came, it was not fear, but defiance that filled her eyes. They beat her. They demanded names, but she refused every question. Before her execution, one soldier asked her if she regretted anything. She said, "I only regret that I cannot do more." Her story echoed through Holland after the war, and she became a symbol of courage so pure it burned through time itself. The blonde ghost of Holland had died, but the spirit she awakened never did. Madrid, 1944. In the cafes where diplomats whispered over espresso, she sat alone with a cigarette and a secret. Her name was Elvira de la Fuente, a woman born from poverty who turned charm into art and deceit into survival. Spain was neutral in name, but a nest of spies and double agents in truth. She played all sides with the calm of a card dealer who already knew the deck. The Germans thought she was theirs. The Allies believed she was theirs. But in truth, she served only the cause of freedom. She used perfume and patience to slip into the circles of ambassadors and officers. She listened more than she spoke and recorded every word in her mind like music. Her reports traveled through coded letters written in the margins of poetry books and slipped to couriers who risked everything to pass them on. When the Germans discovered her deception, they sent men to silence her. But she vanished into Lisbon like smoke through keyholes. Her name appeared on no memorials, her face in no photographs, but her information changed the course of convoys and saved the lives of hundreds of sailors. In war, the loud are remembered, but the quiet ones win. The game Elvira became a ghost that no side could claim, a phantom who proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon a woman could wield was simply being underestimated. Vienna, 1944. The city was crawling with spies and monsters wearing medals. Among them walked Vera Atkins, a woman with sharp eyes and a mind that could see through lies like glass. She worked for the British Special Operations Executive, and her job was not to fight, but to find and recruit the kind of women who could wile. Men planned battles. She built the invisible army of female agents who carried messages and guns and hope into occupied lands. Every interview she held was a test of nerves. Could a woman keep calm while staring at death? Could she lie with her face still? Could she vanish in a crowd and become another story entirely? Vera's answers built the backbone of the most dangerous missions in France. But her work did not end with selection. When agents disappeared, she hunted their traces through Europe,
piecing together last messages and captured letters. They called her cold, but she was burning inside because every missing agent was a promise she had made and refused to forget. When the war ended and the camps opened, she was one of the first to walk among the ruins, searching for names that had vanished from the records. She found evidence of betrayal and courage tangled together. In her silence, she carried the grief of hundreds. Vera Atkins never held a gun, but she commanded a secret war that defeated monsters in suits and uniforms, and she did it all without applause. Warsaw, 1944. The city was dust and bones, yet inside that ruin danced a woman who refused to kneel. Her name was Irina Sendler, a social worker who became a ghost under German occupation. While others smuggled guns, she smuggled children. Using ambulance routes and fake documents, she saved more than 2,000 Jewish lives from the ghetto. She carried babies in toolboxes and led toddlers through sewers whispering lullabies to hide their cries. Every rescued child was given a new name and a place in a hidden home, but she kept their real names buried in jars beneath an apple tree so that after the war they could find their families again. The Gestapo captured her once, broke her legs and demanded names. She gave them nothing but silence. Her friends bribed a guard to fake her execution, and she escaped on crutches, returning to work the same week. Courage for her was not about fighting, but about refusing to stop doing what was right. When the war ended, the children she saved became the only living proof that goodness had survived the darkness. They called her the Shadow Dancer because she moved between life and death with grace and never let the light die. Of Cairo, a young woman named Hilda Leach played a dangerous double game. She was the mistress of disguise, fluent in Arabic, German, and French, and she used her charm like a compass, guiding her through the maze of spies who filled the city. She served drinks to officers during the day and passed coded notes to Allied agents at night. Her beauty made men careless, and their carelessness became her weapon. One night she learned of a German plot to ambush British convoys moving through North Africa. With no time to send a message, she stole a truck and drove across the desert under a moonless sky, dodging patrols and sandstorms. Her warning reached the convoy just hours before the attack, saving hundreds of soldiers. When the sun rose, she stood on the dunes, watching the smoke rise from the failed ambush, knowing that her name would never be written in any report. They called her the Desert. Rose not for her beauty, but for how she survived in a place where nothing else could bloom. Paris in 1944. The war was ending, but the games of deceit were not. In a smoky club near the Seine, a woman in black silk poured drinks for men who wore iron crosses. Her name was Liane. The German believed her to be loyal to the Reich, but her heart belonged to the resistance. She had lost her brother to a firing squad, and every night she served those responsible, smiling as she planned their ruin. She memorized their schedules and passwords, her laughter covering the sound of secrets being stolen. One night she slipped poison into a general's glass, and with his death, an entire shipment of weapons never reached the front. But betrayal has a cost, and soon she was discovered by another spy who loved her more than his country. He gave her a chance to run, and she refused, saying someone must stay to finish it. The next morning, the Gestapo raided the club, and all they found was a shattered bottle and a single glove. Liane was never seen again, but the network she protected survived, and that was victory enough. Oslo, 1942. Snow covered everything, even the graves, even the fear. A nurse named Liv Haugland worked at a military hospital that treated both Germans and resistance prisoners. She spoke softly, carried bandages and secrets. She smuggled messages inside bandage rolls and maps inside medical kits. Each smile hid defiance, each gentle touch hid rebellion. When resistance fighters were brought in bleeding, she would whisper codes while pretending to pray. She stole morphine and antibiotics to keep them alive long enough to escape.
When the Gestapo began to suspect, she forged new identities for herself and continued the work, under different names, moving from hospital to hospital. They called her the Angel of Norway, not because she healed, but because she gave hope to those already marked for death. At the war's end, she vanished into the mountains, leaving behind a trail of saved lives and unanswered questions. Ukraine, 1943. The forests burned at night and the ground froze by dawn. Among partisans and broken tanks walked a sniper they called Nadia. She was small and quiet, with eyes like frost and aim like vengeance. Her family had been wiped out by the invaders, and she joined the Red Army with one purpose: to make them remember her name. But Nadia was more than a sniper. She was also a courier of messages between Soviet and Polish resistance. She memorized entire codes and crossed enemy lines, dressed as a peasant or nurse. Each mission brought her closer to death and further from mercy. In the ruins of Kharkiv, she assassinated a German officer known for burning villages. When her own commander was captured, she led a rescue under blizzard skies using only moonlight and instinct. She disappeared before the war ended, her rifle found abandoned near the border. Legends say she became a ghost, still guarding those forests where no soldier ever felt safe. Egan, Normandy, 1944. As the Allies prepared for D-Day, the war became a stage of illusions, and the best magician was not a man. Her name was Betty Thorpe, known by her code name, Cynthia. She moved through embassies and military offices as if born to that world. Yet she was a British agent who made deception her masterpiece. Her beauty was a weapon, but her mind the true danger. She seduced secrets out of German and Vichy officials, mapping troop positions and defenses without firing a bullet. When plans for the Allied landings were at risk, she risked everything to steal codes from a locked safe inside the French embassy in Washington. She wore elegance like armor and moved with calm while danger circled closer each night. Her information reached British command and shaped operations that would lead to the liberation of France. Even the German intelligence chief later admitted her reports had blinded them to the real invasion plans. Cynthia proved that sometimes the most powerful spy was not the one who carried a gun, but the one who could make the enemy see only what she wanted them to see. Her name was Goethe, and her husband had died fighting for Hungary's freedom. Rather than flee, she joined a network that smuggled Jews and resistance members out of the city through abandoned sewers and train tunnels. She carried cyanide pills for those who could not be saved and false passports for those who could. Every night she guided strangers through the darkness, and every morning she returned to her home like nothing had happened. The Gestapo suspected her, but never found proof. Her apartment windows faced the river, and she used candlelight as code for when it was safe to move. When they finally raided her house, she refused to surrender her network. She swallowed her last pill before they could take her. The resistance survived because she chose silence over betrayal. Her story spread through Budapest as a ghostly legend, the widow who defied an empire and gave hope to the hopeless. Brittany, 1944. The coast was crawling with German convoys guarding supplies meant for the front. In a small fishing village, a young woman named Claire worked at a warehouse, counting crates and smiling politely. The soldiers never noticed how she listened to everything. She was part of a small resistance cell tasked with delaying shipments of weapons. When orders came for sabotage, Claire volunteered to infiltrate the convoy, pretending to be a driver's assistant under her scarf. She carried explosives hidden in bread baskets. At dusk, she slipped the charges beneath fuel trucks and left before dawn. Hours later, explosions rolled across the coastline, turning the convoy into fire and wreckage. The Germans searched every house, but no one betrayed her. She returned to her post as if nothing had changed. Her small act of courage delayed the enemy's advance by days, but saved thousands of Allied lives. She was only 19, but in that week, she changed the balance of a war without ever touching a rifle. Berlin, 1945. The city was collapsing, bombs falling night and day, and yet in the ruins one woman still worked her mission. Her name was Marta, an undercover operative planted deep inside a propaganda office. She translated German reports for the Allies, smuggling information through coded letters and invisible ink. When the Gestapo began purging suspected traitors, she destroyed every trace of her identity, burning her past page by page. Her final message carried routes for Allied troops and locations of safe passage for prisoners. She sent it hours before her building was hit by artillery witnesses. Later said she was last seen standing at her window watching the fire rise. Marta never made it out, but her last report saved hundreds who would have walked into traps. She died unseen, but her ashes carried the last whisper of victory into a dying empire. Prague, 1945. The war was ending, but vengeance still had work to do. A courier named Lyda rode, her bicycle through bombed streets carrying letters and maps for the resistance. She looked harmless. No one suspected that she was also tracking Nazi officers fleeing justice. Each letter she delivered contained coordinates for ambushes and arrests. When one officer who had executed her family tried to escape, she followed him across the border disguised as a nurse. She handed his location to Allied agents, then disappeared before dawn. No one ever saw her again, but weeks later, the officer was captured. Her bicycle was found leaning against a wall with a single flower tucked into the handle. They called her the Courier of Vengeance, the girl who rode through hell and never looked back. Rome, 1944. The city was divided by soldiers and silence. In the basement of an old library, a woman named Sophia cataloged more than books. She hid coded resistance messages inside the covers of banned manuscripts and used book loans as a network of spies. Priests, soldiers, and refugees came to her for words and left with orders. When German officers began using the library, she smiled and served them tea while their reports lay hidden beneath their hands. Her secret files were never found, and after liberation, she reopened the library to the public, as if nothing had happened. Only the dust knew that beneath those shelves rested a record of every secret traded for freedom. Paris, 1944. In a cabaret lit by dim red lights, a woman named Celeste danced each night for men she despised, German officers, drank and laughed while she performed on stage with her eyes cold and fixed on the mirror above them. Hidden behind that mirror was a small microphone wired to a transmitter in the ceiling. Every word spoken in that room was being sent to a secret Allied frequency across the river. Celeste memorized troop routes whispered by drunk officers and turned them into songs she hummed the next day to her handler. When the liberation of Paris began, she led soldiers through back alleys known only to her and vanished before dawn. No one ever found her again, but an empty stage light flickered that night as if her ghost had taken one final bow. Warsaw, 1943. They called her Katerina, but her real name was lost when she joined the underground. She, dressed as a socialite, attending SS parties, gathering information over champagne. Her laughter disarmed men who never guessed she was feeding their plans to partisans hiding in sewers below the city. Once, when the Gestapo suspected her, she hosted a party herself, inviting the very officer sent to arrest her. By the time he realized her trap, his men were already surrounded outside by insurgents. She escaped that night through a burning tunnel, her dress torn and her face covered in ash. They said she walked out of the flames like vengeance itself and disappeared into legend. Berlin fell, and the world called it victory. But for the women who fought in silence, there were no medals, no parades. They burned their names from history, erased their codes, and returned to lives of quiet faces and haunted eyes. Their missions had changed the course of battles, yet no one spoke of them. Some married and never told their families. Others vanished across borders carrying secrets they would never reveal. Their work lived on in files marked classified, in diaries buried under floorboards, and in the freedom of millions who never knew the price. The seductive shadows of WW2 faded with time, but their courage never did, and somewhere behind every story of victory there still lingers the echo of a woman's footsteps disappearing into history.